Well, good evening and welcome to the Wisconsin Idea, Past and Present. This course recognizes the power of ideas. That's why it's called the Wisconsin Idea. The significance of conceptualizations, because they're important for directions taken in both the past and the present. The conceptions are important for shaping directions that are taken. This semester, the Wisconsin Idea is our focus. It's a conceptualization important to directions in the state and beyond, as we will certainly be emphasizing. And we're inviting all of you to join us in examining conceptions and expressions given to the Wisconsin Idea and the issues surrounding those expressions. For this year, we're especially interested in connections of the Wisconsin Idea to democracy. We're looking at the principle that the University of Wisconsin in particular should promote the well-being of the populace and would do so by enhancing the assets of citizens and connecting citizens to one another. There is a statement in something that President Teddy Roosevelt issued when he was applauding the Wisconsin Idea. And he said at the time, the people must be given full power to make their action effective. And at the same time, they must be the educational institutions of the Commonwealth, our Commonwealth, the educational institutions must be built up in such a shape as to give the people the opportunity to learn how to use their power wisely. A challenge, then, for what the educational world should do. So we invite you to join with us by thinking through the issues associated with enhancing the well-being of the populace and connecting citizens with one another. But who are these we? Who are the we I keep saying are inviting you to join us on this journey of exploration and examination? I'm Cora Merritt, and I'm Professor Emerita. For the colleagues who talked me into this, remember, I was trying to retire. Professor Emerita of Sociology. Joined on the team with Eric Sandgren. Where is Eric? Eric Sandgren, who is the professor of pathobiological sciences in the School of Veterinary Medicine. And he's, in fact, the other person with co-responsibility for the course. Thomas O'Gwyn, is Tom here? Thomas O'Gwyn is Distinguished Professor of Marketing in the School of Business, and some of you will know he led this course a year ago. Gregory Wilson. Gregory here is a PhD candidate in sociology with extensive teaching experience at the University of Illinois. And I don't know whether Kimberly Abley is here or not, but Kim is a specialist in the Department of Marketing with just superb organizing skills. Now, the milepost for the journey that we're taking together will be the Tuesday evening lectures, but there are also Wednesday evening discussions. And we would encourage you to join in those discussions because they do represent opportunities for probing in greater depth than we sometimes will have time here, the ideas, the concerns, the issues that are on the table. There are also readings and other sources that should enrich the discussions, the lectures, and the conversations we hope will be advanced. And you're invited to participate in everything that we're seeking to do. For other details, I ask that you consult the website, which is canvas.wisc.edu, or ask any of us don't ask me, I'm just doing this for the first time, but other people who are better informed can tell you about how things have worked, and we're all open to your ideas for the future. Now, I don't want to take an extraordinary amount of time because you came tonight, I know, to hear our distinguished lecturer. This is the opening for our discussions of the Wisconsin idea. And we are fortunate to have with us David Hoeveler, who is Distinguished Professor Emeritus, also retired, from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He's especially known for his book, John Bascom and the Origins of the Wisconsin Idea. But we're fortunate to have him because his work extends across any number of arenas and encapsulates key things from intellectual history. That intellectual history covers more than Bascom. And we're pleased that he's actually going to be talking about at the crossroads, the past and the present. In looking at the past, he's examined intellectual traditions in higher education. That's significant because we will later have discussions that focus on how have people thought about the place of higher education here and elsewhere, and what are the implications. But without taking more of his time, I now turn the podium over to Professor Hoeveler.
Well, thank you so much, Cora. I'm delighted to be back here again to launch the fourth round of this course on the Wisconsin Idea. I remember a night here 3 years ago that was hotter even than this one. So I'm used to it, and I thank you for coming out this evening. So, we contributors to this project this year received some guidelines about what we might turn our attention to. We're asked to take the subject outside the university into the larger public, to give some attention to the questions of democracy and related subjects, and to raise this matter of we-ness, our commonality, and the public concerns and priorities. What challenges does the Wisconsin Idea face in pursuing these goals? And I took this set of directions to be a turn to the blue, hence my title, The Wisconsin Idea at the Crossroads of Politics. So this evening, let's be political. I'm going to begin with a brief look at John Bascom, for those who are not familiar with him, and a look at the progressive era of the early 20th century. But I'm going to bring this subject into its contemporary situation, too. The Wisconsin idea is a contested idea today. Rival attitudes toward it reflect the very divided politics in the United States. But need they? What I'd like to do this evening is to argue this, that the Wisconsin idea needs a supporting intellectual environment for its healthy existence. We'll explore where the Wisconsin idea can find such a support system. On what resources can it draw? And how might it then promote we-ness and a healthy public in which it can thrive? How do we find our way through this political minefield and strengthen the case for the Wisconsin idea? Okay. So, a brief summary. This is John Bascom, president of this university from 1874 to 1887. Those dates remind us right away that he lived in the era we have come to call the Gilded Age. It was an age of big money. It gives us the names of Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan and countless others. But it was also a very violent era, especially for labor. There were more strikes and work stoppages in these late years of the 19th century than in any other era of our history. Think of the Great Strike of 1877, Haymarket, Olmsted, Pullman. The great fear was class warfare. Everyone had on their minds the social question, and where was it going to lead us? Now, Bascom, of course, like any other thinker, was concerned about these directions and wrote and spoke prolifically on all aspects of American life in the late 19th century. Let's say, is that better?
How's the audio in the back?
Top.
Thank you.
Reminds me of my old survey class in Milwaukee. Always had trouble with that. Okay, so a brief background by way of what John Bascom was thinking about the events and directions of his time. I'll say, first of all, that he greatly appreciated capitalism. He admired the expansion of commerce and the way it linked peoples together, expanded their horizons, brought different nations and cultures into closer contact with each other. He admired the creativeness and the inventiveness he saw in the wonders of technology in his age of the Second Industrial Revolution. This is because John Bascom admired everything about the human intellect. Wherever it had its successes, whether it was philosophy, or religion, or in daily life. But he was very concerned. He was concerned that the Gilded Age, as we call it, was leading to excessive domination of society by powerful new corporations and trusts. There were many dangers, but most important for him was the fact that many people were left out because money and private interests had become so powerful and so strong, and that there was a social gap that was very disturbing as well. He spoke about the debilitation of the working classes, the desolation of life in the tenements in various cities. So he put out an intellectual argument for change. And I'll summarize it in 3 brief points so we can have a capsule view of his directions on this. First point, his critique of laissez-faire economic theory. Let's remember that free market ideology was dominant throughout American higher education at this time. It was the orthodoxy of the day. And Baskin was one of the first people to impose this really close criticism of it. The notion that open, uncontrolled competition will lead to the best interests of all society, Baskin judged a myth. This so-called natural system, he said, will always have unnatural results insofar that it leads to an imbalance of power and a bad distribution of wealth. And the power that accumulates to these interests, he warned, disables the whole social complex. He cited specifically the power of money to influence newspapers, state legislatures, even churches and colleges and universities. So the second point is, where Bascom was led to say there is a new role for the state or for government to play. It must act to create a fairer competition, because the fact is that we do not all begin life with equal advantages. So Baskin could say the race is to be renewed morning, noon, and night on equal terms, and government should have a role in doing this. But it's important to note, I think, that Baskin had a very particular notion of what the state is. It is not just an aggregate of individual citizens. It is an organism, and we'll use this term from time to time in our session this evening. It is an organism, a whole, a meaningful collective, and it must assure that all its parts, all of its components, are healthy and contributing members to the organism. And the third point concerns the question of public right versus private right. Bascom had a clear priority for the public. He knew the dangers here, and he wanted to have a balance. Yes, he said, throughout most of human history, the problem has been too much power in the hands of states and kings, and monarchs, and so on. And he will tell us that the liberty of the individual is the great trust of government. However, we live in an age, he said, in which we must redress an imbalance. Now we have too much power, as we've noted here, and he could say this: all personal rights submit to the public welfare. That's a strong statement. But he did insist there is such a thing as a common interest, and democracy needs an equilibrium of rights. All right. I want to move on to the next generation of the Wisconsin idea, into the early 20th century. And I want to note, first of all, an important change that was taking place. We had, of course, always been a nation of immigrants. But in the late 19th century, immigration grew very, very rapidly. The statistics will give us a sense of the changes and the numbers here. And furthermore, the composition of the immigrants was changing too. Increasingly, arrivals to the United States came from Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, and Russia, as opposed to the earlier pattern of a predominance from the British Isles and Germany. That graphic gives us an orientation to the shift I'm describing here. Okay. This was a problem for many people. Many raised concerns about the numbers and the sources of these immigrants. There were fewer Protestants, more Catholics, more Jewish, coming from the Palest settlements in Russia. What will this mean for the complex of American society? What will it mean for assimilation? What will it mean for democracy? The Wisconsin people had much to say on this question. They and other intellectuals looked at race and race differences, and many of them became proponents of something called eugenics. By the way, I didn't pick this building vocation. I'm not trying to be clever about having it sort of genetics building on UW campus. Well, I'm sorry to report, however, that the Wisconsin people had a big role in this time. At the university, the intellectual environment was shifting. Baskin had said that philosophy should be the queen of the curriculum for undergraduates at this University of Madison. But we're taking a more naturalistic turn. The cult of science is becoming more and more prevalent. Standards of empiricism were more emphasized now than abstract thinking. And all of this was underscored by the continuing influence of Darwinism in American intellectual life. I won't go through all of the people involved here from Wisconsin. I will highlight one for our focus here. And I'm referring to material drawn from the book. I'll put my sources on the screen here from time to time if you're interested in following up with this on your own, which I what we may do. This is a recent book by Thomas Leonard called Illiberal Reformers, Race, Eugenics, and American Economics in the Progressive Era. Now, one of the people from the Wisconsin idea was John R. Commons, an economics professor. And in 1907, Commons wrote a book called Races and Immigrants in America. Commons set the discussion for his chapters in an opening chapter which he titled Race and Democracy. And immediately he linked the political success of America to the special role of the Anglo-Saxon race. But that steady, stable compound, Anglo-Saxonism and democracy, now, Commons said, that compound is under threat from an inflow of peoples with no experience in democratic government. But the key part of his argument here, I think, is this. What it comes down to is what Commons calls race differences. Race differences, he said, are, quote, established in the very blood and physical constitution of human beings, and are differentiated according to these sources. So controlling are these facts of a group's character that they remain entrenched and pose severe challenges in our country to assimilation. Slavs, Latins, Semitics, Mongolians, all cited specifically in John R. Commons' book. You will see, if you look at Leonard's study, that Richard T. Ely, Charles Van Hise, Van Hise Hall here on campus. He was president, he was a graduate from the class of 1879 under Bascom, became president in 8 years. Richard T. Ely, a source of the Sitting and Winning statement in 1894, was an economist as well. And Edward A. Ross, who came a bit later at the University of California, and wrote in very, very strong terms I wouldn't want to quote here, about the immigrants coming to America. But the last three of these people in particular spoke favorably of eugenics. They said, we can shape human beings the same way we can shape animals and plant life by experimentation, crossbreeding, all kinds of things. And this is why the book that I referred to here by Leonard gives so much attention to the Wisconsin, but not to them alone. He sees this view, this racialism, pervasive in the progressive movement. The Wisconsin State Legislature, you may know, passed a sterilization bill in 1913. Okay, this has always puzzled me. I've never been able to make a direct linking between the race views and the Wisconsin progressives. To be sure, the vogue of eugenics was short-lived among them. They got on with other things. But anyway, I want to ask the question. With this focus on race differentiation, are we at the beginning of what we often refer to today as identity politics, which has become a hot-button issue in our campuses? I know one group that says yes, and does make a connection, and these are conservatives. What do we mean by identity politics? Everything from a preoccupation with diversity to the priorities of multiculturalism. Especially in our universities, many charge, these concerns have led to efforts to protect particular groups by creating safe spaces for them and providing veto power over who is allowed to speak on campus and who is not. Okay, so as I go through my discussion tonight, I'm going to give examples of local figures to illustrate the points I'm making here. So I'm dealing with a group of conservative thinkers and picking up this issue here. And Jonah Goldberg. And this is the book I'm referring to, published recently. Goldberg holds a chair at the American Enterprise Institute. He's a senior editor in National Review magazine, and author of a book called Liberal Fascism. And this is his book of 2018 called Suicide of the West. Rebirth of tribalism, populism, nationalism, and the word identity politics is destroying American democracy. Chapter 8 of this book is called The Progressive Era. He takes a long look back at intellectual history to make the points he's getting at in the present situation. But when he goes to the Progressive Era, he turns his attention to the Wisconsin School of Progressives and to Richard T. Ely especially. The Wisconsin School, Goldberg says, was a kind of think tank for the Progressive Era. Nice expression. He also features Edward A. Ross here. Goldberg saw two major errors in the thinking of the progressives. First, their model of the organic state. It is for him a gospel of collectivism, a blueprint for the replacement of the competitive economic system with a cooperative one, and a license for state tyranny. Secondly, he turns his attention to eugenics. It shows the logic of liberalism, Goldberg believes. Why? Because liberalism then and now sanctions the power of experts, science, to plot the course of human advancement in all things. In society, economics, education, you name it. And this, Goldberg says, is monstrous and dangerous as ambitions for any state to have. To say nothing about it reflecting a kind of overweening hubris that does this. But why not change human beings too? That's the connection he makes between liberalism and race thinking. So a legacy of liberalism, according to Goldberg, is identity politics. That's where it's led. Chapter 10 of the book is called Tribalism Today. And he's concerned with the assault on ideas of individual merit and colorblindness as influenced by identity politics. Furthermore, he said it's a power play, a vehicle of power for those who would shut down the open campus, define what is permissible discourse in culture wars, and obstruct the free and open ideal of university education. My second example for conservative critique here is George Will and his book, The Conservative Sensibility. It's brand new, off the press. This is a book of more than 500 pages. It's a very learned book. It's written with Will's eloquent prose, his sharp wit, his expansive knowledge. I think it's the most important conservative summary since Russell Kirk's book, The Conservative Mind, going back to 1953. But the general thesis is clear from the beginning to the end. This is a libertarian manifesto. Here's Will. American conservatives are the custodians of the classical liberal tradition. This can be confusing. By liberal means classical liberal economics. You'll understand this when I say that Will's intellectual heroes are John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Adam Smith, going down to the 20th century, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman. and other apostles of laissez-faire economics and minimal government. What does this mean? It means the absolute priority of the individual over the state. This is a continuum throughout these pages. And the state has its only business in protecting that individual freedom. Progressivism, or liberalism, Will says, is a long-sustained effort to undo this arrangement. Progressivism, I'll quote from Will, represents the overthrow of the founders' classical liberalism. And it seeks to replace the system of individual freedom with a rival model. And what's the rival model? When the progressive use the system of freedom, the organic community. It attempts to fuse individuals into a unified whole. And the world, Will says, has paid a very heavy price for that effort, for that misplaced grand ambition. So he celebrates the individual over the public. Direct contrast to John Bascom in this Libertarian Manifesto. You can read this whole book and you don't hear expressions from Will, expressions like the public interest, or the common good, or the social contract. He never discusses the social pathologies that beset so many human beings in the United States today. And mostly any government help on their behalf is dismissed as paternalism and the work of a nanny state. Well, we're not through with him. Because if you go to the index of this book and look under or for Wisconsin, you'll see the Wisconsin idea. And it will take you to page 49. Why does Will want to deal with these rests way back here? The Wisconsin idea. He gives us some brief references to Robert La Follette, Charles Van Hise, Ely, and their social gospel. Then he presses his biggest quarry, eugenics, with specific quotations from Richard C. Ely on certain human beings as absolutely unfit, and Van Hise on human defectives. Will wants to make race thinking a coefficient of progressivism generally. And he casts a wide net. Again, it's not Wisconsin. It's Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Oliver Wendell Holmes. There's a large cast of characters here. But it comes down to today's champions of multiculturalism. They are not, Will says, far removed from the racialists of Wisconsin progressivism. They see everything, from intellect, culture, to politics, as determined by race, gender, or class. Will judges these notions, these confining categories, as both condescending and undemocratic. All right, we might have a problem here. Because of those associations that people seem to be able to make with this very unwelcome heritage, progressivism to race thinking. So I want to ask the question, is there a different reading we could give to Wisconsin progressivism and the Wisconsin idea than the ones that these people are taking? I think there is. I'm going back to John Bascom. As I did the work on the John Bascom book, I began to ask myself, why does John Bascom talk so little about race? Well, was it because he was apolitical? Ain't no way. Bascom was one of the most politically charged presidents of any university I know in the late 19th century United States. Temperance, women's rights, the cause of labor. These three were his constant preoccupations. Was it because we're getting before this eugenics era and race thinking? Not at all. There was a lot of race thought around at the time. I could demonstrate that easily, but won't do so now. Why did Bascom resist these theories or ignore them? Because they were irrelevant to him. Let's think what Bascom was. This will be new to some people here, so I'll explain that John Bascom was a philosopher and a theologian. He was a product of German philosophical idealism. That is, the system that came out of Immanuel Kant and his successors in Germany. And their concern was with the power of the human mind to access higher spiritual and moral reality by means of an intuition, a faculty of intuition that is built into the complex of human thinking and into a common human nature. Secondly, Christian theology, of which his branch, if you will, was liberal Protestantism. And by liberal Protestantism, what Bascom would say is that the essence of religion is morality and human love for one another. And that morality, that human love, unites the disparate components of our society. Bascom was an early champion of what became the social gospel movement later on in the 19th century. And third, the intellectual influence on John Bascom was evolution. It demonstrated for Bascom the adaptive power of the human mind, the human brain. And it represented for him the transcendent, this one powerful transcendent feature of all human beings, their mental capacities. The long and short of it is, I believe, Bascom saw no need to make race distinctions. However, I'll give you just two examples of instances, there were not very many, when he did make comments about race. Okay, so remember, he came to Madison in 1874, which gets us toward the end of the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. We had passed legislation for civil rights and other measures, and it was controversial. Bascom heard all the time people, Southerners and Northerners too, saying the African race and the former slaves are not equipped for modern society. They have no capacity for democracy. They are of an inferior human race. Bascom did not like these ideas. And in an essay he said, the only thing that matters, quoting Bascom, is the dominant idea of a common human nature. Likewise with this Anglo-Saxonism, which had been strong in the United States since the days of the founding fathers. Bascom didn't like this talk either. In his selfish, arrogant pride, he said, Anglo-Saxon race superiority. At a baccalaureate address at the University of Wisconsin, Bascom denounced, quote, the madness of Anglo-Saxon pride and added that it overrules the Christian imperative of love for all humanity. So I'd like to introduce a second group of people, second category of political thinkers, if we will. And these are liberals that I would place in the Bascom side of this divided progressivism. Liberals who have little to do with multiculturalism and get liberalism back on a better course. So, we had an opening salvo on this effort, this concern. When Arthur Schlesinger Jr. wrote his book, The Disuniting of America, Reflections on a Multicultural America. I think it was 1992. Schlesinger is a very well-known American historian, a founder of the Liberal Americans for Democratic Action group after World War II. He was a White House advisor to President John F. Kennedy. but he wrote as a concerned historian in putting his book together. Schlesinger says, we have always been a racially and ethnically diverse nation. That's good. And we have moved increasingly away from an Anglo-dominated one. And that's good too. But the process has always been one, he says, of healthy integration. Because the new arrivals here aspired to be Americans. In short, they wanted to grow the melting pot. They wanted to partake of a larger American citizenship. And to create a unity that would come from the power of democratic ideals. Schlesinger saw a change and a shift of emphasis. The cult of ethnicity has arisen among non-Anglo whites and among non-white minorities to denounce the idea of a melting pot, to challenge the concept of one people, and to promote and perpetuate separate racial and ethnic communities. The side effects find this in the area of political correctness and a therapeutic culture that is not healthy for this free, open exchange of ideas. So I want to go to contemporary sources. This goes back a little bit, but this continues among liberals. So I introduce, I have to go back. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Let me introduce, Mark Lilla, L-I-L-L-A. His book was The Once and Future Liberal, with a subtitle called After Identity Politics, published in 2017. Lilla is professor of humanities at Columbia University. And this book is a kind of general lament about what he sees as a changed liberalism. So he tells us at the outset, quote, I write as a frustrated American liberal. And Lilla describes the new liberalism as a cult of individual autonomy at the expense of a larger notion of the public good. Thus, he says, we have the new buzzwords of liberalism: personal choice, individual rights, self-definition. He focuses on American higher education, as you might expect. It has succumbed to this ethic, and it has proliferated curricular programs that Lilla calls narrow and exclusionary. And for this, he blames the politics of identity. Politics of identity, Lilla writes, is the de facto creed of two generations of liberal politicians. And it has caused a dangerous side effect in our politics. We have moved from issue-based concerns and policy to identity-based concerns instead. Much is at stake here. This has impaired our notions of a common citizenship. We have lost that focus in our curriculums in universities and colleges. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Lilla, this is the way you feel. You didn't see him here earlier, did you? Okay. One more quotation. This is Lilla. There can be no liberal politics without a sense of we. What we are as citizens and what we owe each other. If liberals ever hope to recapture America's imagination, they must offer a vision of our common destiny based on one thing that all Americans of every background actually share, and that's citizenship. Liberalism, he adds, almost in the words of John Bascom, should be a tool for inclusion and not withdrawal. Well, you've already met my other guy. Here he is, William Egginton. I'm going to be shorter with him because he replicates some of the things Lilla is saying. But his book is, as you can see here, the Splintering of the American Mind, and again, Identity Politics Services in the subtitle, Inequality and Community on Today's College Campuses. Eggington is a professor of the humanities at Johns Hopkins University. He labels himself a disciple of Richard Rorty, the philosopher, of his philosophical pragmatism, and of Rorty's liberal politics. He's actually defensive of multiculturalism and affirmative action, but he sees it as going in a one-sided direction at the expense of our losing a common identity and a common focus on our mutual citizenship. All right, I'm going to deviate that. I put a quotation there. What is lost in all this is the very idea and purpose of the liberal arts, which regards and elevates those aspects of being human and are not reducible to today's dominant model of the individual. All right. So I will introduce my last group here, and this is a group of conservatives. One that I will call Reform conservatives, although I more frequently refer to them as classical conservatives. And it's another entry into our discussion. This is a group that has been uneasy at best, and sometimes hostile to the directions of conservatism in the late 20th century and early 21st. Against an orthodoxy that they see as a thoroughgoing anti-statism and almost a contempt for democracy that they do not share. And economically, the whole recent history of neoliberalism is also a mark of their dissent from the dominant conservatism of today. Now, I've introduced two conservatives who are part of that orthodoxy, if you will. That's Jonah Goldberg and Phyllis Will. And I want to introduce two more speaking for the Reform conservatives. Let's go back for one moment again to John Bascom. Bascom, as noted, based his reform program and his critique of laissez-faire on this model of the organic society. But many intellectual historians will tell us that the first modern expression of the organic society ideal goes back to Edmund Burke, a British statesman, best known for his devastating critique of the French Revolution, reflections on the Revolution in France in the late 18th century. For Burke, like Baskin, the word society signifies something cohesive, a cooperative unity of vastly different parts, and not a mere collection of individuals. Bascom often quoted Edmund Burke. And I find this fact rather significant, that this committed, liberal, progressive thinker, John Bascom, should find some intellectual support in the great conservative of the late 18th century, Edmund Burke. Today's dissenting conservatives are very much in this line of thinking. In the face of Donald Trump, they have sought for a more authentic conservatism. And they have begun to look back to their own intellectual roots to acquire it. Much of this effort, in fact, goes back to the Reagan era, where some conservative writers found grounds of dissent also in the emergence of neoliberalism and the Reagan denunciation of government. So two examples to finish up our display today of this reform conservatism. Yuval Levin wrote this book, The Fractured Republic. Levin is a frequent contributor to National Review and was to the now expired Weekly Standard. And he's been called, quote, the leading intellectual of reform conservatism. Levin labels himself a cultural conservative and a traditionalist conservative. The book's subtitle registers a key theme of the new conservative revisionism, renewing the social contract in an age of individualism. He writes at the outset, in our cultural, economic, political, and social life, there has been a trajectory of increasing individualism, diversity, dynamism, and liberalization. This condition has been brought about by the left, but also by a libertarian-leaning conservatism from which he dissents. It has come at the cost of dwindling solidarity, cohesion, stability, authority, and social order. And the main factor in it all is our old friend, identity politics. It affects how we live together and how we treat each other. We seem today to have group rights and individual rights in proliferation. But, let me tell us, we have experienced a severe loss of the common stock of rules and norms that enable people to live and work together. These fracturing effects have eroded our idea of society. And sadly, Levin says, we can see the manifestations of these directions in loosening attachments to marriage, family, church, work, and politics. So Levin speaks for social conservatism, his term, as an alternative to libertarian conservatism. Two rival conservative viewpoints here. And he sounds very Baskin-like in a lot of ways. We need all our communities and our cultural communities to turn inward, yes, but also outward, and to enter into the larger whole of society. They must make themselves vehicles of integration. And my final example is David Brooks. David Brooks, a long-standing columnist with the New York Times, author of several books. Now, Brooks said once that he was a big lefty at one time. And then he read Edmund Burke on the French Revolution. And he said, this book changed my life. Brooks began a 2007 editorial with a statement, modern conservatism begins with Edmund Burke. Brooks has written at length on the need in America for a renewed public ethic and in American politics. The priority of the individual interest over the public interest impairs our society, Brooks says. He decries the manifestation of detachment, separation, aloofness, estrangement, and alienation from public life that seems to be endemic across American society. They rend, they tear apart the social fabric. But that social fabric is our life sustenance, Brooks tells us. It's the achievement of generations who have gone before us. It offers a life that is sustaining. And it is the true source of our own personal meaning and identity. Our true selfhood should be discovered within a larger complex of human beings. In thoughts like these, I find myself, when I read Brooks' editorial commentary, I find myself thinking of John Bascom. This is another comment from Brooks. Burkean conservatives believe that society is an organism. It values social cohesion alongside individual freedom. It fears that too much individualism destroys the unity that any society needs. He has two more points here. One, a clear standing aloof from market capitalism, free market capitalism. And this, he says, is where the Republican Party has gone. This ideology has captured the Republican Party, and it is a source of Brooks's own unease, to say the least, with that party today. Market fundamentalism, however, he says, is an inhumane philosophy. When left to total control, it leaves people defeated and undone. It is an inhumane philosophy that makes economic growth society's prime value and leaves people atomized and unattacked. And finally, the question of diversity. Brooks supports it. He calls himself a pluralist because he believes, like John Bascom, that cultural mixing is always a good thing. It is enriching to all who participate in it. All cultures define and renew themselves, Brooks writes, in encounters with others. But to do so, they must enter the public square. They cannot be withdrawn and seeking only their self-purification. We pluralists, Brooks writes, believe in integration, not separation. At stake, he believes, is our very democracy. Because the challenge for America today, he writes, is to build a multicultural democracy. I'll finish with a brief conclusion. John Bascom believes that what democracy needs, as much as anything else, is an open mind. It must seek far and wide for the ideas and values that will sustain it. Sustain the social organism. Because like the human organism individually, it too must adapt. It too must meet the challenges of the day. And to do so, it must again have all of its components healthy, contributing members. The state and the public good suffer from what is excluded, left out, and denied equal access to the political forum. But Bascom also observed that this process is not easily or comfortably pursued, this wide open search for new ideas, because we enjoy social as well as intellectual conformity. We find security in our fixed ideologies. Bascom warned us against this and encouraged our overcoming these fears of opposing ideas. So I tried to suggest this evening that the Wisconsin idea will flourish best when its supporters open their thinking to a wide variety of sources. They can gain from points of view that span the intellectual spectrum of politics from left to right, from liberal and progressive to conservative. And they can, in that way, I believe, move the Wisconsin idea forward.
Professor Hoeveler has agreed to respond to questions, observations, and comments. I think that I'm sure there are lots of comments to be made. And one of the reasons we have this course is this is a university that has a whole website, the Wisconsin Idea, suggesting that this isn't something just from our early history. And there are things that continue to be of import to us. So those are the kinds of things that this kind of history that he's given us a brief overview on is certainly relevant for the kinds of things we'll be undertaking through this course, but through the kinds of activities you're engaged in. But I wanted to refer to two other people who are with us this evening and probably give them a chance to make some observations initially. Professors Ross Tangerdahl and Professor Jeff Snowbarger are here from UW-Stevens Point. But they're here because they just reissued the book that has the title that we're talking about. It was Charles McCarthy who coined the expression the Wisconsin idea. And what they have done is to pull together a new edition of the McCarthy book. So they will have a chance then to respond to raise issues with reference to this very powerful introduction that makes links between what happened much earlier during the Bascom era and to bring this to the present, suggesting again, unlike a source I was looking at recently said, well, all of that Wisconsin idea stuff, that's all in the past. That has nothing to do with where we are today. This is hardly what the comment here or the lecture tonight has demonstrated. But I didn't come up here to talk. I came up here to help facilitate the conversation. So let me see, do either one of you want to make any introductory comments? Either.
You're up forward, go ahead.
Oh.
I'm more better.
One of the things that came to mind as you were talking, when speaking of Bascom forming his ideas during the Gilded Age, I think it's very clear that we're living in a age maybe not so dissimilar to the age of the late 1800s. And, you know, we are not necessarily beset with the certain kind of scientific racism that was, you know, sweeping across the nation as it was in the 1800s, you know, where they were judging people's races literally on cranium size. So we're not doing that right now. But one of the things that interests me in the work that you've done with Bascom in the past, and something that I noticed in doing the work for McCarthy's book, is that McCarthy's very clearly writing about, you know, a specific legislative session, 1911, and talking about political reforms, very specific political reforms that, you know, voted representatives were bringing in order to enact pretty sweeping changes to the state. So I guess given what you've said about, you know, identity politics sitting at the fore right now, where do you see some crossover now with some of these ideas that are related to the Wisconsin idea and how they relate to actual legislation and the role of the university and education in terms of kind of shaping the Wisconsin idea now and moving forward? Sorry.
I picked up this long query. Are you referring to the campus situation?
That's certainly in the air. But if anybody, you know, has been mindful of what's been going on, you know, at the political level of the state in the last, you know, not just 10 years, not just the past administration, but a lot of these discussions have been had at the public level for quite some time. I guess I'm just wondering where you see overlap now with the role of the university, the role of policy, and as it relates to the Wisconsin idea.
Well, you know, if I were to go in that direction, I would include something that's not in this lecture. I hate to cheat the question by doing that. And that's this question of populism. As maybe the thing about populism is you can have populism of the right and the left. Usually it's of the right. You think of McCarthy and George Wallace in Alabama and so on. But Robert La Follette was a populist too. And I find it remarkable that Wisconsin produced a situation in which a populist leader, a politician to the core, Robert La Follette, produced an intellectual achievement, working with Van Heist and Ewing and Comment and other faculty. Because if I were to go through these populists, I could always find their contempt for thinkers, for professors, for intellect, for expertise. That is in the mix here. But it's not in my lecture because Bascom was not a populist. Bascom had great hope in science and expertise. He believed that the graduates of the university would form a kind of elite because of their special education. They would lead the state. They would lead in restoring the public interest against powerful interests. Now, I'm afraid that that opinion has stuck and has affected American politics today. Because you ask anyone in the Republican Party over here, they'll say this campus is loaded with liberalism and progressivism. Things haven't really changed since the Wisconsin idea. And you know, we all know how that has played out in state budgets. But this is a difficult question because it's not just here, and it's not just Republicans. You trace the level of support from state governments to their state universities, you'll find that there are many Democrats and liberal Democrats who have been part of that erosion over the last good half century almost at this point. And that's because I think there has entered into a certain strand of liberalism, this populist deference. The idea that the common person is not getting his due. And elite professors and wealthy students are living off the generosity of the taxpayers. And I don't think this is right. Now, I can be sympathetic to that argument to some degree, as Baskin would too, I assure you, by noting how many workers have been replaced by the global economics of our day, and jobs that are exported, and the competition that has kept wages virtually static for a long, long time. So I would have a pretty large mix of things here. Did even begin to answer that tough question? I hope I got a start.
I think populism is a good, it's something really important to think about as it relates to.
I mean, how do you be democratic and sympathetic to the broad base of human people without falling to the point of disdaining trained minds and experts and people who have spent years just to get doctorate degrees and worked very hard? We have a president who doesn't care what science of and with the environment our government say. There is no global warming after all, so the hell with it. And we have censorship here in the state. Populism, unfortunately, almost always is anti-intellectual, as I said, which is why the Wisconsin phenomenon is so special.
Now, although we have another comment here, let me, would you mind if we go to, okay, hands? No.
So I want to say this carefully, I guess, because I really appreciate the attempt to pull together liberals and conservatives and force us to think across partisan divides. This is Madison. We're like pretty blue. So we need to have our minds open. So I'm not challenging that, but I couldn't help but feel concerned when there's eugenics is brought in and race, and then all the attacks on multiculturalism, and there's no voice of a person who's not a white man, right? So it just made me very uncomfortable. That's what I wanted to say, is the way that discussion wasn't bringing up the identity politics of the white men who thought the whole problem is other people. So I realize, again, I don't want to attack the talk because I really appreciated what you were trying to do, but it did make me very uncomfortable.
Okay. Gender is missing too. We could have had more on the question of the feminist movement and where it fits in and curricular changes and so on. It's a huge subject. It's not 100% by any means. I wanted to select from the contemporary view those voices that most readily lend themselves to the continuity of discussion with the progressives. I mean, there's a lot more to the to multiculturalism. Could cite, well, I can't think of his name. The old person who wrote a reply to Bloom on Closing the American Mind, an American intellectual. Yeah, we can go very wide. I understand your concern. Sorry?
I mean,
Okay,
Oh,
we'll
no.
probably,
I didn't want to, I just wanted to lift up that concern. I
Sure,
understand.
I appreciate you doing that.
yes. Let's see, any other observation? Well, I said we'll come back here. I do want to indicate that one of the reasons for all of this is to provide opportunities for us as a part of the University of Wisconsin community to think about, are there some overarching ideas? Are there some overarching issues that can bring us together even if they are across all sorts of different lines? So what we've been interested in, and Eric might very much want to elaborate on that, are the opportunities for the exchanges across faculty, across staff, students, about where are we and what is it we seek to do in the context where we are now. So that's a part of the reason I said I am going to let Eric make some comments, because one of the things he said, having been an undergraduate here, is how much he's been influenced by the Wisconsin idea as he's interpreted it. Do you want to make any comments, Eric?
Sure. I think in particular with reference to tonight's discussion, what strikes me is that you're finding threads that link back to Bascom in various forms of liberal and various forms of conservative ideology. And to me, a very striking statement that was produced in a book that was published by people from this campus. It's called The Political Classroom, and it's really about, should we talk about politics in higher education? And the answer is yes. Not partisanship, but politics. And that we're engaged in talking about politics when we address the question, how should we live together? And that's the core here, this notion of we, the notion of sort of a social fabric. We, in our individual groups, in our tribalistic nature, will have views that are absolutely incompatible with those in other tribes. So we have a choice in a democratic country to either fractionate into sort of the lowest common ideological denominators where we all share all our thoughts, or we figure out how to recognize that there's that difference among us, but live together despite that. A lot of that has to do with respect. So, and a lot of that has to do with understanding that other people have a right to their opinions just as we do. And that's something that struck me from tonight. That and it seems as though that idea is present all over the spectrum. Would you say that's kind of an accurate connection? Does that sound about right?
Agree with you 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, with that, oh yes, we want everybody to join us for a reception to thank our guests, but to meet one another, because as we've said, this is to be a part of the whole matter of engaging this question of how do we live together. It's we right now within the University of Wisconsin, but much more than that. So we do want to welcome the ideas, the comments, and just I'm certain that people might feel a lot more comfortable with their questions if we're in a different kind of setting. So join me in thanking Professor Hoeveler.